A warm welcome to episode 4 of the second season of the Realise Mindfulness podcast. And today we're going to be focusing on treating habits with compassion. In the first 3 episodes of the season, we've focused on building firm foundations of mindful compassion. And today we're going to be growing our compassion and kindness muscles as we turn towards some of the more difficult and tender ways that we need to offer ourselves kindness. And that's in response to our less helpful patterns and some of our desires. And we'll specifically explore today how we can mindfully and compassionately relate to desires, ending our episode with a guided practice to support us with this. And to give you a flavour of what else we'll be covering, we'll begin by talking about some of the common human patterns and how we can recognise them and make a shift to treating both our patterns and ourselves more kindly. And specifically we'll look at the nature of the inner critic and the role of our self-conscious emotions like shame, guilt and shyness. And as we do in every episode, we'll share a short on-the-go compassion practice that you can use anytime, anywhere, as well as ending with a longer guided meditation, which today will be a kindly relating to desire practice. A short disclaimer at this point. The Mindfulness-Based Compassionate Living course was developed to support you in deepening your mindfulness practice. And so it assumes that you've already spent some time building mindful foundations. So if you're new to mindfulness, you might find it helpful to start by listening to season 1 of the podcast. And if you're ready to explore mindful compassion now, then let me acknowledge that the Mindfulness-Based Compassionate Living course is rich and deep, and this podcast is in no way a replacement for attending an 8-week course. Rather, it is intended as either an introduction or a companion or refresher for the course. And if you're interested in finding out more, I've included some helpful links in the show notes. So, without further ado, let's begin today's episode as we explore treating habits with compassion. Kindness and compassion help us to explore the inner landscapes of our psyche with kindness and gentleness. Maybe you can picture an old-fashioned map. We used to have one hanging on our wall when I was a child, and I was fascinated by it. Often, when these maps depict the coastline, they show old-fashioned sea monsters. It was a sign that we were venturing into the unknown. It was uncertain what we would encounter. And of course that offered both adventure and risk. In previous episodes, we've explored the fact that we can sometimes feel anxious or self-conscious about practicing compassion, in case perhaps we're perceived as weak or self-indulgent. In fact, the opposite is true. As one of my wise teachers puts it, this is not work for the faint-hearted. It takes courage to explore our inner landscape, and we can, on occasion, encounter our own monsters and gremlins. That's why it's important to have a firm foundation of mindfulness under our feet before we begin this work, and also why working with a qualified teacher and a supportive group on a similar journey can be so helpful. Sometimes we may need to embrace our demons, and at other times it may be more sensible to establish boundaries. On the Mindfulness-Based Compassionate Living course, we learn skills to tune into our intuition and our inner knowing as to what may be most helpful for us in the moment. You can get a flavour of this in this brief exercise, inspired by mindfulness teacher and psychotherapist Tara Brach. So an invitation to arrive in mindfulness, If you're sitting, maybe feeling into your base where your body's in contact with the chair and feet on the floor. And if you're moving around, then maybe coming to stillness and feeling feet in contact with the ground. And an invitation to call to mind a small challenge that you've experienced recently. Something that perhaps gives rise to a slight sense of aversion, of not wanting or resistance. But something that feels very workable right now, nothing too major. Examples could include how you relate to your daily commute, responding to a challenging email, or negotiating the daily household chores, or anything that comes to mind. And first, noticing how it feels to relate to this challenge with an attitude of no. Really embody and take the attitude of no. I don't want this. Feel it in your posture, your body. Say it out loud if you feel comfortable doing so. Maybe repeat it in your head. Adopt facial expressions that represent no. Really sense into how you can embody this sense of no and resistance. And then let the no go. Maybe shake out a little, change posture. And just reflect on how it was to embody no in that way. What did you notice? How would it be to go through the whole day embodying that posture of no? So now an invitation to approach the same situation, now with an attitude of yes. So reflecting yes through your posture and your facial expression, allowing a sense of it's okay, or I welcome this. Maybe saying it out loud, or repeating it quietly in your head. And really embodying yes through your facial expression, maybe smiling. Embodying yes in your posture and way of being. Really feeling into yes. And then when you're ready, letting the yes go. Maybe shaking out the body again and changing posture. And reflecting on what you notice about the yes. How did that feel? How did that affect your mood and thoughts? And how would it be to go through the whole day with this attitude of yes? Now bear in mind there are no right answers to this activity. Your experience is your experience. For some situations, an attitude of yes may support your experience of the situation. In another situation, an attitude of no, and putting in place clear boundaries may be more appropriate. Leading compassion researcher and teacher Kristen Neff talks about the yin and yang of self-compassion, the need for both tender and fierce self-compassion. The skill is to know which is called for when. This can be particularly true when working with our drive system and desires. From an evolutionary point of view, the drive system is designed to make sure we grab what we can when we can. Our prehistoric ancestors never knew where the next meal may be coming from, and so we're primed to have a high scarcity and a low satiety measure. This doesn't make life easy in a world of high-calorie, easy-access food and snacks. Likewise, our brain's wired to respond to the quick-fire dopamine hits offered via social media accounts, online gaming, etc. So it's not surprising that many of us report having a somewhat problematic relationship with our phone. The good news is that awareness opens up choice and that we can develop new habits and make wise choices. There's a well-known Native American teaching story about two wolves. In the story, a young boy shares with his grandmother that he feels like he has two wolves living inside of him. One wolf is full of anger, envy, sorrow, greed and regret, while the other wolf is full of joy, peace, love, hope, serenity, kindness and compassion. The young boy's concerned, and he wants to know which wolf will eventually win. The grandmother takes the young boy in her arms and holds him to her chest. She kindly explains to him that a similar battle is being waged inside all of us. And the wolf that we feed is the one who will win. Of course, there are many different takes on this story, but one thing it points to clearly for me is the truth that what we incline our mind to is what we become. Or in scientific terms, the potential of experience-dependent neuroplasticity. If we take small, practical daily steps towards kindness and compassion, we will grow more of this in our lives. By regularly practicing a behaviour or way of thinking, we start to create well-worn neural pathways, making this way of being more easily accessible. So, let's come to our on-the-go practice for today and put this into action as we share together a 3-step breathing space with kindness. Eric van den Brink shared this practice with us in episode 1 and explained how it becomes a backbone of the MBCL programme. The practice is a slight twist on the traditional 3-step breathing space, adding in an extra scoop of soothing and kindness to help us practice building the muscle of compassion. So, choosing a comfortable position, however you're listening right now, and maybe making some small adjustments in your posture to enable you to come to mindful awareness, both comfortable and alert. And in the first phase, simply noticing what you're experiencing right now. What thoughts are here? What feelings? And what physical sensations in the body? Kindly acknowledging whatever arises, creating space for both the pleasant and the unpleasant, welcoming all experiences just as they present themselves. In the second phase, there's an invitation to let your attention rest on the breath if that feels comfortable for you. And if not, then you always have the choice to focus on another anchor, maybe a sense of the body on the chair, feet resting on the floor, or sensations of the hands quietly resting in the lap. And if it is okay to move the attention to the breath, following the breath all the way in and all the way out with a relaxed attention. And allowing a calming, soothing breathing rhythm to emerge. Maybe just gently slowing down or deepening the breath. So perhaps taking a deeper breath in and then audibly sighing out on the out breath. And then allowing the breath to find its own soothing breathing rhythm. following the breath all the way in until in-breath naturally turns to out-breath. And following the breath all the way out until out-breath naturally turns to in-breath. And a soothing breathing rhythm may be supported by consciously sensing the ground that supports you, allowing your muscles and your face to soften, allowing your chest and your heart to open like a flower opening to the light, allowing your belly to freely rise and fall. And if you like, you may like to bring one or both hands to the body, either on the chest or the belly or anywhere else that feels natural for you. Maybe feeling the warmth of the hands against the body, their soothing touch. And if your mind wanders, then being kind to yourself. There's nothing wrong, it's simply what our minds do. And the moment of noticing is an opportunity to kindly bring the attention back to the breath. Simply following the rhythm of the breath. Breathing in and breathing out. Then, in the third phase of the breathing space, expanding awareness to take in a sense of the body as a whole. The whole body breathing. And tuning into yourself and noticing what comes up when you ask yourself, what could be a kind wish to myself in this moment? And you may find a wish naturally arising. And if nothing presents itself, then maybe you'd like to work with one of the traditional wishes that we all share as humans. May I be safe. May I be healthy. May I be happy and at ease. And whichever words you choose, choosing words that come from your heart and can be accepted and received by your heart. And you may like to allow the wish to flow on the rhythm of the breath, quietly in the silence of your own head, repeating "May I" on the in-breath and your wish on the out-breath. Maybe allowing a gentle smile to accompany the wish. Maybe offering yourself some soothing touch, one or both hands on the heart. And knowing that every experience, pleasant or unpleasant, can be welcomed as part of this practice. Kindly being with ourselves and our own experience. So when you're ready, letting your wish fade into the background and knowing that you can return to this practice whenever it would be helpful for you, whenever you wish. But for now, letting the practice go. And continuing together as we carry on with the theme of our podcast today. So, making time to practice mindful compassion regularly is one surefire way to feed the wolf of love and kindness. Many participants report that shorter on-the-go practices, like this 3-step breathing space with kindness, make this more accessible. And of course, like any muscle, we need to invest time in building the muscle of mindful compassion. And when we're first starting out, it can be really helpful to be deliberate about how we include the breathing space in our day. Some people find practicing at preset times, for example after each meal before we jump back into doing mode. Some people find that helpful. My favourite time to pause and practice, being a typical Brit and loving a cup of tea, is when I'm waiting for the kettle to boil. As we're developing new habits for mindful, compassionate well-being, it's also helpful to acknowledge that many of us have well-worn mindset and life scripts, a result of past experiences, both painful and positive. Week 3 of the Mindfulness-Based Compassionate Living course looks at this in much more detail, including a compassionately relating to inner patterns practice. Here, I'll simply offer a taste of some of the ideas and point to links where you can find out more in the show notes. Professor Paul Gilbert suggests that we have 3 basic modes of operating, linked to the emotional regulation systems which we explored in episode 2. These are threat mode, competition mode, and caring or compassion mode. So when we're operating from threat mode, which sadly is a dominant script for many of us, a primary motivation is to protect ourselves. It means we're constantly on our guard, looking out for signs of danger. We may well create images and stories that reinforce our gloomy or threatening worldview. And of course then we'll be feeling anxious and irritable, suspicious towards others. Another common pattern is competition mode. Here our attention is drawn to rewards. We may fantasize about being successful and admired. Our behaviour is all about achieving. When this pattern's on overdrive, it can result in rivalry and envy, pursuing our goals to the detriment of others. This leads us to a third, alternative way of being. Caring mode. When we're operating from caring or compassion mode, our motivation's social connection and balancing the needs of ourselves with the needs of others. There's an atmosphere of non-judgment, accepting and calm. Many of us are much better at turning this way of being outwards than turning it inwards. In fact, when we explore this in a group during a course, we recognise that many of us are driven by our own inner critic, or even an inner bully. We say horrible things to ourselves, often with the intention of driving ourselves on. But this is a misguided strategy. As we explored in the last episode, the research around self-compassion shows that when we're kind to ourselves, we're more likely to persist in the face of difficulty. We'll experience greater well-being and form stronger social connections. So on the course, we work at befriending our inner critic and developing an inner helper. These exercises particularly resonate with me, as my inner critic can have a very loud and mean voice. When I first came to mindfulness, I hoped it would offer me some new ways to deal with my lifelong relationship with low mood and depression. And it did. However, particularly outside the supportive holding space of the 8-week course, I found it difficult to shift the harsh inner self-talk that would run in my head, beating myself up even further when I was finding things hard. Familiar self-judgments could run something like this. What's wrong with you? Haven't you got the hang of this by now? Everyone else is managing, just get on with it. There's nothing to feel sad about right now, so why are you moping around? Just toughen up and get on with it. Maybe some of these phrases sound familiar to you, or maybe you have your own versions. When I began learning specifically about self-compassion, it was a real aha moment. A realisation that I could be on my own side. Be kind to myself when I was having a tough time. I'd like to say that from that moment on, my inner critic piped down and all was rosy. Of course, that's not quite how it goes. But I have, over time, noticed a softening and a warming of the tone in which I speak to myself, and a way of being kinder to the inner critic when she pipes up. Nowadays, a conversation between my inner helper comes forward more regularly than my inner critic. I've developed my own versions of the self-compassion mantra we explored last week, so my inner helper may offer kind words of soothing and reassurance, something along these lines. You're feeling sad today. We all have days like that. Be gentle with yourself, my dear. To help us befriend some of our more complex inner patterns, it can help to understand their origins and motivations. Let's spend a moment now considering our self-conscious emotions, emotions like shame, guilt and shyness. These emotions evolved for good reason, to keep us safe and connected and part of the tribe. For our ancestors, being part of the tribe was crucial to survival, so that it's not surprising these self-conscious emotions are hardwired into our human psyche. For instance, the powerful feeling of shame evolved to make sure we complied with group norms, and it ensured our inclusion in groups that were crucial for our survival. There's lots of wonderful research on shame that sadly we won't have time to explore in today's episode. But you may be interested to look at the work of Brené Brown or Chris Germer. I'll include some supporting links in the show notes. Guilt evolved a little later than shame, when we developed the capacity for empathy. If shame leads to a harmful sense of, I'm wrong, I am wrong, then guilt offers the message, I did something wrong. The good news is that this gives us opportunities to redress our mistakes if we can tune in to guilt's helpful message and not get stuck in unhelpful blame and recrimination. Embarrassment and shyness are also emotions that most of us can identify with. In human groups, we need a lot more followers than leaders. Embarrassment and shyness can make us cautious about putting ourselves forward. Being aware of our own personal patterns with mindful compassion can help us more objectively and accurately tune into the messages of our self-conscious emotions, question their truthfulness, and enable us to make kind and wise decisions about what action, if any, might be required. Here, a breathing space with kindness, or even with a flavour of compassion, which we'll share together next week, can help us to come to mindful awareness, bringing our soothing system on board and tuning in to a kind wish for the moment. On the Mindfulness-Based Compassionate Living course, we talk about mindful awareness offering us an off-ramp from the motorway of unhelpful patterns, so that we can enjoy the scenic route of compassion and kindness. By this, we mean that when we're caught up in habitual patterns, it's often like driving on the motorway, caught in the flow of traffic, often on autopilot, or even cruise control, and maybe a long way from the next exit or off-ramp. Mindful awareness helps us to notice and question if we're headed in the right direction, if we're still headed towards our intended destination. We may choose to take a different route, perhaps even a more enjoyable route, one which enables us to savour the opportunity of being kindly present to our experience. The Persian Sufi poet Rumi has some words of wisdom and guidance to offer here. Pure of heart, we travel through the world and get enchanted by everything around us. We're always seeking, but we forget that we are already what we seek. With these words in mind, let's move on to focus on the realm of desire, leading into the longer practice for today's episode. You're probably familiar with the Greek legend of Odysseus, known as Ulysses in Latin. As the story goes, Odysseus was able to overcome the craving and longing caused by the lure of the siren's song by instigating some clever responses to the overwhelming pull of their beautiful music. With the guidance of the goddess Circe, who advised Odysseus to instruct his crewmates to tie him firmly to the mast of the ship, plugging their own ears with beeswax so that they would not succumb to the beguiling siren song, Odysseus and his crew were able to sail safely past temptation. What do you take from the story? For me, there are a few points that resonate. First, I'm struck by the fact that Odysseus would not have been able to resist the siren song without the support of his crew, and of course without Circe's wise guidance. Second, I'm struck by the fact that willpower alone is often not enough in the face of strong temptation. Odysseus had every intention to resist the siren's song, but when actually faced with their haunting melody, he begged his crewmates to untie him and strained so hard against his bonds that they cut into his skin. So, how does all this apply to our journey of mindful compassion? As we explored in the last episode, willpower and self-esteem can be poor motivators. Being on our own side through self-compassion and kindness, seeking support when we need it, can be much more effective strategies. In week 3 of the MBCL course, as we move our focus towards dealing kindly with habits and patterns, we share a compassionately relating to desire meditation. This is a practice I find myself returning to every so often as a way to gain kind insight into habits and urges that may be derailing me. To share an example, a while ago I was feeling disheartened by regularly giving in to the desire to check my email messages first thing in the morning. I generally find that the best time to meditate is first thing in the morning, soon after waking and before stepping into the tasks of the day ahead. However, I'd noticed that I was regularly sabotaging myself and missing out on this precious time to practice. In the time between waking and the school run, there was ample time to fit in my meditation, if I made it a priority. But instead I was getting sucked into checking email and messages and drafting replies. The compassionately relating to desire practice helped me to reflect on what was driving this behaviour and what it was giving me. I was able to notice that I was operating in drive mode. There was a definite sense in my body of leaning forward into the day, and thoughts like, "Oh, I've so much to do. If I start now, I might get ahead of the game." There was also a drive for reward. That mini dopamine hit of a new like or business invitation, and the feel-good chemicals that sends coursing through our system. But I was also able to recognise that by missing out on my morning meditation and focusing on my drive system, to the detriment of my soothing system, I was already stepping into the day with a mild sense of busyness and agitation. These insights helped me to catch myself in the morning, and as I was reaching for my iPad to check emails, I was able to pause and sense into what I really wanted. I'll be honest, there were occasions when the emails won out, but at least it was a conscious decision and not one run on autopilot. And on many occasions, that brief pause to check in with my intentions and to what I really needed in the moment was enough to set me on the track of settling down to my meditation. In a moment, I'll guide us in a compassionately relating to desire practice. It's an opportunity to practice urge surfing. We notice desire as it arises. We get curious about how it shows up. And we also notice as the urge passes away. But first, let's recap on what we've explored together today. We began by looking at how we can compassionately relate to resistance, by adopting a stance of no or yes, and how this links to the yin and yang of self-compassion. Sometimes fierce self-compassion is what's called for, and on other occasions it's tenderness. We looked at how with mindful compassion we can make conscious choices about which wolf we feed, and we shared an on-the-go breathing space with kindness practice to help us feed the wolf of kindness. We talked about common human patterns, how we can recognise when we're in threat or drive mode, and how we can make a shift to treating both our patterns and ourselves more kindly with caring mode. And also how understanding the nature of the inner critic and the role of self-conscious emotions like guilt and shame can help us in developing our inner helper. And to whet our appetite for our kindly relating to desire practice, we considered some wisdom from ancient Greece, and I shared my own experience with the practice. So, for the last 15 minutes or so of our time together, I invite you to join me in practice, finding a space where you won't be disturbed, and settling into a comfortable posture. This is a compassionately relating to desire practice, and the invitation is to mindfully and kindly explore an area of desire. The way our drive system can sometimes kick in and create suffering or difficulty in our life, and how we can relate to that more kindly. So, choosing a comfortable posture for our practice, and that might be sitting or it might be lying down. Whatever you choose, taking good care of yourself and allowing some moments to really arrive in mindful presence. Maybe making any adjustments to your posture which allow you to be alert yet relaxed, and really tuning into the sensations, the points of contact where the body's resting on whatever surface is supporting it. Maybe that's through the seat and the soles of the feet in contact with the ground if you're sitting, or perhaps all down the back of the body if you've chosen to lie down. And as ever, we begin our compassion practice with Step 1 of the breathing space, just opening to mindful awareness of whatever's here right now. Not needing to change anything. Just noticing what's here. Sensations in the body. Thoughts. And moods. Emotions. As best we can, creating space for it all. With an attitude of kindness, of gentleness and understanding towards ourselves and whatever's present right now. And then we move to step 2 of the breathing space, inviting a soothing breathing rhythm. So maybe allowing the breath to slow and deepen. Not having to try too hard, simply allowing the breath to flow all the way in, until naturally in-breath turns to out-breath, and then allowing the breath to flow all the way out, until once again out-breath naturally turns to in-breath. Following the flow of the breath for the whole breath cycle. Maybe with a sense of allowing ourselves to be gently rocked on the rhythm of our own breath. And knowing that at any time in our practice, you can return to either a sense of the body firmly grounded on the surfaces that you're resting on, or to the soothing breathing rhythm, resting in the soothing flow of the breath. And now there's an invitation to choose an area of recurring desire for you. Perhaps it's an area of your life that causes suffering or challenge. So it may be a habit or a pattern, something that you want, you crave quite regularly. And an invitation to really choose something that's workable for you today. So if we think of the metaphor of a challenge, a desire that's a massive boulder that we feel we're carrying around, and one that's a tiny grain of sand on the beach, and then further up the beach the pebbles, then maybe picking something that's more of a pebble, or even a grain of sand. And whatever you choose, something that feels workable for you today, and knowing you can always come back to your anchor. Body on chair, feet on floor, soothing breathing rhythm. So, common areas of desire that crop up for many of us in daily life can include habits like the urge to eat unhealthy foods, to drink alcohol, or to smoke. Or maybe it's a desire to buy things you don't really need, or to binge watch TV even when you know it's time to go to bed, or to play computer games compulsively. Or for many of us it might be a sense of an unhealthy relationship with our phone this urge to constantly pick up our phone to divert ourselves, or needing to feel like we need to be online all the time, checking emails or our social media accounts. It may be a sexual desire, or a desire to be seen and appreciated by others, or to be funny, to always be right, to be admired. Whatever you choose, letting it be a desire that you experience regularly, something that crops up in everyday life that you find difficult to resist, and something that may cause frustration, perhaps even feelings of shame or guilt when you're in its grip. When you've settled on an area to work with today, an invitation to really bring it to life by imagining a recent situation where this desire was prominent. Imagining that you're feeling the desire right now, as if you were again in that same situation. And if it feels okay, you can imagine that the desire is getting stronger and stronger. But even as it does so, you know that you're going to withstand the temptation. You're not going to satisfy it right now. Rather, we're going to explore the inner landscape of this desire with the curiosity of an explorer investigating a new territory, seeing what we find, being open to every detail. So, how is this desire affecting your body? What do you notice in your posture? Are there any areas of tension in your body? Perhaps holding or tightness or constriction somewhere. What's present in your face? Your neck and your shoulders, the region of your chest, down in your belly, your arms and your legs. Are there any recurring thoughts? And what happens to your mood state? Your emotions. And an invitation now to drop in a question as we observe the nature of this desire, and not needing to force an answer, just allowing it to arise naturally. And perhaps there's no answer. Perhaps there are many answers. So just letting yourself be surprised by whatever arises. And getting curious as to, is there anything lying underneath this desire? Perhaps there's an emotion or a deeper need hidden under whatever you're exploring today. What's going on for you under the surface? Perhaps there's a deeper longing for something that you really value. What needs are you trying to meet? And really listening with your heart for any possible answers, while gently repeating these questions, maybe in different ways, gently exploring what's underneath this desire. What do I really want and need? What am I trying to satisfy? And if nothing particular comes up, then just being with that, continuing to explore the nature of desire as it shows up moment by moment, observing your reactions. And then if it feels okay, maybe exploring the question again. What's really beneath this desire? Letting the question sink deeper and the answers resonate. And an invitation to really acknowledge the humanness of this desire, whatever it is. Maybe asking yourself, how many people on the planet may share similar desires? Is it just a handful? Maybe hundreds? Maybe thousands or even millions of people across the planet sharing this similar desire. The very humanness of it. And an invitation now to respond to your desire with a kind and compassionate wish. And the wish may relate to meeting those deeper needs, the ones that maybe arose as you reflected on the questions. So recognizing yourself as a vulnerable human being, sharing the needs that all human beings have. So maybe your wish is, may I be safe? May I be well? May I be happy? May I know peace? And these may be familiar wishes. And certainly they're wishes that have been used in kindness practices for millennia. As we join in this sense of common humanity. And perhaps there's a specific wish that you'd like to offer yourself. So creating space for that to arise now. Perhaps a wish for calm, for patience, understanding, a wish for connection. Just allowing space for whatever comes up. And maybe repeating this wish on the flow of your own breath. May I on the in-breath. And the wish on the out-breath. And knowing that you can return to your anchor or the soothing breathing rhythm at any time, if that's helpful. Maybe noticing how the wish is received in the body. Whether there's a sense of welcoming the wish, a sense of relief or release. Or maybe there's a sense of resistance or sadness. Knowing that it's all part of the experience. And as best we can, allowing mindful compassion to envelope our experience. So as our practice begins to draw to a close now, honouring and congratulating yourself for being willing to work courageously with this desire. And letting all sense of the desire and the kind wish fade into the background for now. Coming back to a sense of body firmly resting on whatever surface is supporting you. Maybe a sense of feet firmly on the floor. A sense of the breath in the body. And maybe taking a couple of deeper breaths to send the breath all around the body, energizing and oxygenating our body. And if your eyes have been closed, slowly blinking them open as our practice comes to a close. Thank you for joining us for today's episode. It's my heartfelt wish that this podcast, in its own small way, contributes to the spread of mindfulness and compassion in our world. If you like the podcast, please subscribe and follow it. And if you have friends who may be interested, please share it with them too. And if you'd like to find out more about me and my work, including the Mindfulness-Based Compassionate Living group course and one-to-one coaching, you can do so at my website, www.realisemindfulness.com. Please do keep listening, and if you'd like to keep in touch, it would be wonderful to hear from you. So, until next time, wishing you ease and kindness in the flow of life.